I rented a cabin deep in the mountains. Someone was already living under it. Some memories don't fade, not because they were the worst days of your life, but because you only understand how close you came to dying after it's already over. I still think about that cabin every October. Sometimes I'll wake up in the middle of the night convinced I can hear slow footsteps beneath my bedroom floor. It takes me a few seconds to remember. I'm home, not there. This happened almost 3 years ago. At the time, I was working logistics out of Roanoke, Virginia. Between mandatory overtime and constant weekend shifts, I hadn't taken a real vacation in nearly 4 years. My manager finally looked at my unused PTO balance and told me, "Take a few days off, or you're going to lose them." I didn't want beaches. I didn't want tourists. I wanted silence. Real silence. After hours of searching, I found a small cabin tucked deep in the mountains of West Virginia. 1 bedroom, wood-burning stove. No cell service except on the ridge. 12 private acres surrounded by thick forest. According to the listing, the nearest occupied property was over a mile away. Perfect. Or at least, that's what I thought. The drive there took almost 4 hours. By the time I left the highway and turned onto the gravel road leading toward the property, the sun was already slipping behind the mountains. Long shadows stretched across the road, and the trees looked almost black against the fading sky. The host had already texted me the lockbox code. No greeting, no neighbors, no sounds except the wind moving through the pines. When I unlocked the front door, the cabin smelled like old wood, smoke, and cold mountain air. It felt untouched, peaceful, exactly what I'd been looking for. I unpacked my bags, lit a fire in the stove, and made myself a simple dinner. For the first time in months, my shoulders actually relaxed. After eating, I carried my plate onto the back deck. The woods behind the cabin stretched for what looked like forever. No lights, no roads, no houses, just endless darkness. At first it was calming. Then, I noticed something strange. The forest had gone completely silent. No insects, no birds. Even the wind seemed to disappear. I remember thinking, that's odd. Then, 3 footsteps. Slow, heavy. Wood creaked behind me, not inside the cabin, on the far end of the deck. I froze. Every instinct told me not to turn around. But eventually, I did. Nothing. The porch light barely reached the far corner. Beyond that was only darkness. I pulled out my phone and aimed the flashlight toward the trees. The beam disappeared between the trunks. Nothing moved, no glowing eyes, no deer, no bear. Just blackness. I laughed to myself. Probably an animal. This was the mountains after all. I went back inside, locked the door, and tried not to think about it again. Around 10 that night, I went to bed. The fire had burned down to glowing embers, and the cabin had become almost completely dark. I fell asleep within minutes. Then, I woke up. 2:17 a.m. I know the exact time because the screen of my phone was the only light in the room. At first, I couldn't figure out what had awakened me. Then I heard it. A slow scraping sound, directly beneath the floor. Not running, not scratching, dragging. Like something heavy was carefully shifting across packed dirt. The cabin sat over a shallow crawl space. I'd noticed the vents earlier while unloading my bags. The sound came from directly underneath my bed. I held my breath. It stopped. Then, one slow movement, almost as if whatever was underneath had realized. I was awake for nearly 2 minutes. Neither of us moved. Finally, curiosity got the better of me. I pulled on my boots, grabbed my flashlight, and stepped outside into the freezing night. The beam swept across the side of the cabin. That's when my stomach dropped. One of the crawlspace vents had been removed. Not broken, not bent. Removed. It was leaning carefully against the wall, almost neatly, like someone had intentionally taken it off without making noise. I crouched down and shined the flashlight inside. Packed dirt, support beams, darkness. The light couldn't reach the back. Something about that darkness felt occupied. I stood there for several seconds, listening. Nothing. Trying to convince myself it was probably a raccoon, or maybe the panel had simply come loose over time. I went back inside, locked every door, checked every window. I had just reached the kitchen when the back door handle moved. Slowly. Once. A firm pull. Metal clicked against the latch. Then, silence. Every hair on my arm stood up. I looked through the small glass window. At the edge of the trees, roughly 30 feet away. Someone was standing there, completely still. No flashlight. No phone. No attempt to hide. They were half concealed behind a tree, watching the cabin, watching me. I couldn't make out a face, only the outline of a person. They didn't wave, didn't move, didn't leave. They simply stood there, as if they had been waiting for me to notice them. We stared at each other for what felt like forever. Then, without turning around, they stepped backward into the darkness and disappeared. That was enough. I didn't pack. I didn't shut down the fire. I grabbed my keys, jumped into my truck, and drove away. I didn't stop until I reached the nearest gas station nearly 40 minutes later. The next morning, I contacted the sheriff's office. 2 deputies agreed to check the property. About an hour after they arrived, I got a phone call. The vent hadn't been removed from outside. It had been pushed outward, from inside the crawl space. When they searched underneath the cabin, they found fresh food wrappers, empty water bottles, a flashlight, folded blankets, extra clothes. Someone had been living beneath that cabin. Not for one night. Not for 2. The deputies believed they'd been there for at least a week, maybe longer. Whoever it was had disappeared before they arrived. They never identified them. The cabin owner stopped renting the property shortly afterward. People ask why I still think about it. It's not because I saw someone watching me. It's because of everything that happened before I knew they were there. While I cooked dinner, they were underneath me. While I stood on the deck enjoying the silence, they were listening. While I slept, there were only a few inches of old wooden floor separating us. I had rented that cabin to be completely alone. The truth was, I never was.